I was driving from North Carolina back and heard it on the radio. Well, I didn't even know where Korea was. And I probably never get involved in it.
In the absence of Soviet obstruction, the Security Council voted overwhelmingly in favor of armed intervention to protect the Korean Republic. It was the first police action sanctioned against an aggressor by the Parliament.
They tried to draft me during World War II, but I injured my left leg knee playing sports, and they grabbed me from the early part of the Korean War. I went to Aberdeen, Maryland for 8 weeks of training, just get you in shape. Then I went to Atlanta General Depot to study to be a machinist. But I graduated from there, and I wasn't the top in the class, but I was probably the top 3 or 4. Most of those guys stayed here in the States. I think there were 6 of us went overseas. Of the 6, only 2 of us went to Korea. And I saw I could shoot a rifle. The 40th Division saw I could shoot a rifle very good, and they stuck me on the front lines and got one of their Red Apple boys off the front lines. They made a machine gunner out of me, and I did not have combat training. They sent me into Korea in 1952. They shipped us out from Seattle. Sylvester Anlek, that was the name of the ship. I was in the 40th Division Item Company, 223rd Infantry Regiment. I was private most of the time, but I got promoted to a corporal when my squad leaders kept getting killed, and I got promoted to squad leader. And they had me in for sergeant, but it never caught up with me. So. At night, half of us had to stay awake at all time, and you had to, when you were sleeping, you only 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and you just get to sleep, and it'd wake you up for the next 2 hours, you know, and all night long. You had to watch for the enemy sneaking up on you. If you did any sleeping, it was always during the daylight hours. We were 1.5 miles in front of the main line. I'll tell you a little more about that. We was on patrol, and they seemed like every patrol they went out on, they always had me on it. We was out just beyond, pretty close to the front lines, in front of the front lines, and went on patrol about 1.5 miles in front of that, and we got hit with the enemy. We come up on one of their patrols, and they were over a kind of a hill deal. We thought we fought them all off. Our squad leader, George Smith, was killed. He was ripped apart with a burp gun. I'll never forget the feeling I had. Put him on a stretcher. I picked him up, and his arms were just broken. Just all the bones in his arms were broken. And that was only about, probably about 6 feet from where I was. They got all the wounded ones out first, and I stayed there with my dead until we got a stretcher back for him. We just about got him on the stretcher when all of a sudden a white flag shoots up in front of us. So I motioned him to us and captured a prisoner. I just happened to be at the right spot. He was a Chinese prisoner. I didn't know that at the time, and he was looking for a place to give up. And we had a new regimental commander, and he put out an order. He wanted to talk to a prisoner, and he's going to get a 5-day R&R to Japan, and I got that award. And I talked him into giving it to Farley too, because Farley was with me, and he had searched him. Feel sorry for the families that lost their loved ones over there. Dan Parker was talking to me when he got killed from a single bullet went through the back of his head. He was facing me, and I was facing the enemy, and a single bullet went back to the back of his head and went over my head. There was a mortar company probably 1.5 miles from where I was back there. 11 of them got killed on Easter Sunday morning. They sneaked in behind them and caught them asleep. They thought they were safe back there. They weren't safe. There's no place to. You're in 25 miles or 20 miles of the front lines, you really wasn't safe anywhere. You never know from one time to the next that when you're going to be dead, you know. It gives you a lot of respect for life, for human life. Bought this Leica camera, and the film I used was slide film. And the most exciting thing that I got involved in at all was in the process of the Korean War, the civilians, the kids take a big beating, and a lot of them get orphaned. And at one time, our outfit, when it's back in the rear, had 8 or 9 of these kids and these children. We were feeding them and looking after them. And as a result of that, our outfit was taking up money to build an orphanage over there. And part of our outfit built a building for them. But the children in any war take a terrible beating. Their parents either get killed or they get separated from. I was on the front lines on my wife's birthday, and that's February the 12th. And I spent about 6 months in the fighting, and I got off the line in July. I re-injured my old left knee. I stepped wrong and I sprained my right ankle. I went to the hospital in Korea, in Taeju, Korea. I stayed 5 days in this hospital and then shipped me to Fukuoka, Japan, to the 141st General Hospital in Fukuoka. I spent about a month in the rehab, and they left me on a 30-day rest and recuperation leave. So I had met one of the guys, one of my mates that I went to machine school with, and worked a little bit in the machine shop there a little bit. And then I went back to the hospital, 141st General Hospital. My doctor was Major Duffy, and he'd sent for my records. And he says, I see that you have 26 rotation points. They've taken 2 away from you. I'm gonna give them back to you. You now have 28 rotation points. You're going home. So I can't send you back to the front line, so you're going home. Went back to Camp Drake, Japan, was in Tokyo, and I boarded a ship the next day after Thanksgiving Day, and I was headed home and landed at Seattle again. I put a quarter in a machine over there and got 25 of these little postcards, and I'd mail one of those for each place to my wife, and I beat the cards home. Kind of surprised her. And in fact, we landed it in the Union Station down here on a Sunday afternoon. We had about a 4-hour layover there, and I went home to my wife, surprised her. They sent us down to Camp Crowder on a 30-day leave for coming home from war. Went back to Camp Crowder after this 30 days leave. I had about 3 months left before I could get discharged, and they kept us in the Korean War. They didn't know whether it was going to start up again. They kept us in reserve for 6 years. So I really didn't get my discharge until 6 years later. We had a whirlwind courtship. We met in 1951, and we were married only about 30 days before I went to basic training. We had 2 sons and 1 grandson. In January next year, we're going to have a great-grandkid. Been married now 67 years, and we're still together. We still talk to one another. I look back at all that. At the time it happened, I wasn't too happy. But I look back at it now that it was a good thing. And the real heroes of that war, of any war, are the ones that lost their lives over there. When I look at South Korea today, they have very much the same thing we have here in our own country. You would have the same thing up there that you have in North Korea if it wasn't for the American GI.
Well, I was born and raised in Kansas, and after I graduated, I had a few jobs, but I couldn't make any money. I'd ask for a job, and they'd tell me, when you have your military commitment fulfilled, come back and talk to us. So I went down and joined the Army Reserve. It was a 758 Field Artillery Battalion. We were activated and went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and another friend of mine, we were close friends, and we were from Olathe, and Joyce and her sister, Dolores, went to high school in Turner, and they had a Turner-Olathe football game. And so Ike and I came down for the game, and he met her sister, Dolores, and they started dating. Well, he didn't have a car, so I'd bring him down to see Dolores, and I met Joyce. Joyce and I dated, and at first she wasn't really too interested in me, but I convinced her that I was the person she needed to be with, and got engaged. Went back to North Carolina, and we had planned our wedding for summer, June of '52. And then our plans were to bring her back to North Carolina. Uncle Sam had different plans for me, and early part of March, I got on a levee for Korea. I came home on a delay en route to San Francisco. So we went to her parents and asked for their permission for us to get married. And she was a senior in high school, 17 years old, and I was 21. And so they told us that if the principal would allow her to continue high school, then they would give their permission to her. So went over to him, and he says, don't see why not. So we were married, and we were married 16 days, and then I had to leave her to go to Frisco to catch a boat. So I went to San Francisco, and we rode a ferry boat from San Francisco to Pittsburgh, California, to Camp Stoneman. Got on another ferry boat and went back down to San Francisco, where we got on the board ship, the General Meigs. 13 days crossing the Pacific, and we landed at Tokyo Bay. We got on another ship, the General Collins, and took a 3-day trip to Busan, but it could have been Incheon, I don't know. And we rode a troop train to Seoul. When I was in Fort Bragg, the howitzer, the 240, had to be broken in two to move, and it was drawn by track-laying vehicles. So they saw on my license that I was qualified to drive a track-laying vehicle. So they says, you're going to tank company. Went there as a parts clerk, helped in the mechanics, and I also drove an M46 A1 medium tank. We acted part-time as artillery, just lobbing shells. Other times we were engaged in battle. We were firing at the enemy. Sometimes they were just like hordes of them. The Chinese, after they entered the war, the front lines would have weapons, and as they were mowed down, the ones behind them would pick up their weapons and keep coming. So it was not a fun place to be. We run over a mine or mortar, something, blew a track off, and we were disabled, and we became infantry for a while. And I got the Combat Infantryman's badge. That's of all the ribbons and the stuff that I've got on my shirt, that is the one that's important to me. I was got in Korea to my company in probably the first part of April of 1952, and served there in tank company until January of '53, and then we got on the same General Collins, the ship that I had taken from Japan to Korea, and went back to Japan to Sasebo, Japan. And we boarded the General Meigs, the same ship that I had taken from Frisco to Tokyo Bay. We landed in San Francisco, and then we got on a troop train to Salt Lake City. From Salt Lake City, we went to Fort Collins, Colorado. My sister and brother-in-law and their children lived in Denver, so I had called Joyce and told her to meet me at my sister's. I rode a cab from the bus station to my sister's house, and I told the cabbie, I says, wait until I know this is the right place. And about that time, and Joyce and my sister both tried to get through the door at the same time. And the cabbie says, I think this is the right place. So, and then of course I went back to Collins and was separated from the Army, and then we rode a train home. My mother passed away when I was 18, and when I saw my dad, of course, it was a great feeling. My brother had been in World War II in the South Pacific, and so I knew kind of what it would be like. It was great. Well, when I got back home, I spent about 7 years at the Hawthorne Station at Kansas City Power and Light, and then I went to the Board of Public Utilities, and I was there for 33 years, starting at the bottom and winding up pretty near the top when I retired. Joyce and I have 2 sons and a daughter, and Tracy and Carrie is our 2 granddaughters, and they're both married. Tracy and LJ have 2 children, Kinley and Case, and so we're truly blessed. Easter Sunday will be Joyce and mine's 64th wedding anniversary. My beautiful bride said yes, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I belong to Korean War Veterans Association, Chapter 181. When they first formed the club, we had like $75 in the treasury. And the guys were talking about building a monument or something to show people a little bit about the Korean War. Eventually, we were able to build one with the help of a couple of grants from the federal government and garage sales and pancake breakfasts and so on, and the Korean people. They have contributed greatly. The respect and the thankfulness towards the Korean veterans. When I got home, I see people and say, where have you been? I haven't seen you for a long time. Where have you been? Nobody talked about the Korean War. It was just forgotten. And the guys in Korea there was like 37,000 American troops lost. His name was Jim Donham, and he and I were in a high school together, and we were really close friends. In our senior year, he dropped out of high school and joined the Marines. He was on the front lines, and he was wounded, and they brought him back to an aid station behind the lines in our territory, and it was overrun, and he was murdered in his bed. And every year on Memorial Day, I put a flower on his grave. He was a great guy. I believe in God, and anybody says that they don't believe are lying if they were in combat. There's no saying there's no atheist in a foxhole. It's a true story in my observance, you know.